in the struggle, Melanie Campbell. And so this subject is a very important subject. And I think this is a subject where all of us can learn more and understand more. The notion is to have a complete and an accurate and a truthful count. The notion is to ensure that all communities have a voice in the shaping of this very important process, which is ordained by the Constitution of the United States, and that is the census and the other important research that the census does. So I am excited to do this because we at the National Urban League believe in inclusivity, and that includes sexual orientation and gender identity. It includes race, creed, color, religion, and national origin as we seek to lift up every community. And I also want to thank our new Chief Financial Officer, Sydney Evans, for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Sydney. And as always, we have the Reverend Patrick Young with us, who we will hear from in a minute after I ask Melanie Campbell, my sister and friend, to offer some opening remarks. So thank you all for joining. We're going to have a fast pace and a substantive conversation this afternoon. Thank you very much. Melanie?
Thank you, Mark, and your team, Jerica, for you all, Ifeomi, and of course, our sister Jerry and the whole Urban League family, and all of you all for joining this never-ending process, which is the census comes around every 10 years, but the work continues all over that next 10 years. And so I'm really glad and always honored to partner with you, Mark, and work with you. I always tell folks, you're my brother from another mother in this fight. And so it's always a joy and a pleasure. And I learn a lot from you. I'm gonna call you, I'm start calling you my big brother now, so I can age down. It's my big brother. But thank you for everyone. And to have this today, National Voter Registration Day. Also, what's happening on the Hill, I know this is indirectly related, they're introducing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act today on Capitol Hill. So I think it's a really good day when the census is about inclusion. You know me, and you know that reality about this conversation around sexual orientation and gender identity falls right in line with it. So glad to be a part of this, glad to partner, and looking forward to the dialogue today. I have a couple of our team on the call today. Our youth leader, Daryl Coles, is on, and I think Angelo Greco is on as well. And Mark, I'm gonna Jerica, about halfway through, I'm gonna have to switch to the phone because I gotta get across town to the Supreme Court. But thank you.
Oh, okay. We're going to go to Reverend Patrick Young.
We thank you, and now let's prepare for prayer. God, we thank you for being a God who loves and cares, a God who doesn't exclude, but a God who includes. We thank you on our discussion as we share and conversate. We will have great understanding that you and give us wisdom and understanding as we learn today the value of involving all and not some. We ask you now your blessing. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much, Reverend Young, and we appreciate your wisdom and involvement in this work and the mobilization of the faith leadership and the religious leadership in Black America. Thank you very much. And then I'll turn it back over to Jerica, who's going to take the meeting from here. And I want to thank Jerica. Jerica has now been a part of the Urban League movement now for almost 3 years. It's about 3, Jerica, right at 3?
It's over 3 now. I think this might be the anniversary week, actually.
Yeah, I thought it was close to the anniversary week, but Jerica has stood up our justice unit, known as the Division of Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives, and it's really put energy behind our census work, our civic engagement work, our justice reform work, our police community work. I'm so proud of her and her leadership and the work that we've done to build a strong team and get a lot done. At National Urban League, we're here going through budget hearings, and our budget and strategic planning process always gives me an opportunity to pause and hear what our department heads and our leaders are doing with their work throughout the year. So Jerica, take it away.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Melanie and Reverend Young. And Melanie, thank you so much for reminding us all how important today is and lifting up National Voter Registration Day. We must continue to find ways to ensure that our census work is crossing with various initiatives like redistricting and voter registration. They are all connected and critically important for us in ensuring civic engagement for our community and other marginalized communities. And with that, I will turn the floor over to our special advisor for census, Ioma Iruka, to give us some updates.
Thank you so much, Erica. Greetings, everybody. I'm glad to be here with you all today. Ioma Iruka here. So I'm just going to give you some updates, just to keep you plugged in. I know many of you are always plugged in and obviously plugged into the fight. So this is just some high level. So the first thing I want to kind of just remind us is that there is an open call for 2030 Census Advisory Committee nominations. And thank you for those who've already said yes to being nominated. And so what you'll be seeing shortly will be a template, if you may, to use for your nomination. And I should just flag that we could also nominate you, meaning the National Urban League can nominate you, but we'll need like your CV and resume. But the template should help you in sort of crafting a letter. And because we have the esteemed Jerry Green, who has read countless and thousands of letters, she's able to kind of give us some high level of like, what are the things that you should have in your letter to ensure that you're at least one of 30 committee members selected for this. And I should just flag that the committee could be organizations, individuals. It's a 3-year appointment. And really the idea is that you really help advise the census on issues around how to ensure that the Black community, obviously from our perspective, is sort of connected, aware. It's also addressing any barriers that our communities have in terms of engaging with the census, also completing the census. And so your nomination or either self-nomination or being nominated could really, I think, ensure that the issues of the Black diaspora community is really represented. So we're going to have a template that I'll be sharing shortly. And I should flag that the nomination is due on the 30th, which is a Saturday. And so obviously I'll encourage you to get it in on Friday, if not before. So you'll have a template that you can use to help you. And obviously, if you want to have a conversation to kind of talk through it, I'm happy to also do that with time allowing. And just because we have Jerry here by chance, because she's booked and busy, Jerry, anything, I don't mean to put you on the spot, anything you want to flag about the nomination letter for the 2030 Census Advisory Committee?
No, just to ensure, especially if you've had any involvement in the 2020 census with respect to outreach, you definitely want to flag that. And if you serve underserved population, if you serve our population or other populations that are underserved and underrepresented, that's what you want to put into your nomination letter. You want to, express the kind of work that you do, working with undercounted, if you will, traditionally and historically undercounted populations is quite important. So this is a perfect time because we want to ensure that issues related to the Black count are on the Census Bureau's 2030 research agenda, which they're developing now. So having said that, thank you for that opportunity, Ioma, and we'll just get to cracking on that,
That's right, we will.
Come in.
That's right, we will. So again, we'll obviously reach out again, and thank you for those who've already said yes, and we'll work with you to get a letter in. And of course, we'll obviously want to have the National Urban League represented and members of the Census Black Roundtable represented. And then the other thing I want to kind of also make sure I make note of is just the work that the National Urban League, through the leadership of Mark, has been doing to just ensure that Black people are represented on the Census Advisory Committee. As you may know or may not know, I am a member of the Census National Advisory Committee called the NAC. And there's other committees at the census level. And so Mark, in collaboration with Jerry and Jerica and many others, put in a letter to the Commerce Department as well as to the U.S. Census Bureau to really address both who are the national representatives or committee members in some of their groups, and also the Black leadership within the U.S. Census Operational Bureau, right? So there's issues around, are there enough Black people who are in the sort of technical, statistical parts of the Census Bureau? And again, you know, it's important that we continue to sort of push them on those issues. And so Mark and Jerry, as they noted, had a meeting with the Census Bureau around these issues. It will continue to have quarterly conversations about how we ensure that Black people and Black issues are fully represented throughout the whole U.S. Census Bureau operations, of course. And then finally, we were actually going to have a special, a special guest, at least Plan B, to come and talk about Get Out the Count plan for 2025 to 2030. And as Melanie highlighted, right? So yes, we have the decennial every 10 years, but there's so much that goes into getting to 2030. And so there is a group of funders that have come together with a lot of the Census Community Coalition, and they have put together, I'm going to pull it up, they have put together an outline and a plan about how do we get out the count. And so I'm going to put it in the chat box, if I can do more than one thing at a time. In the chat box, if you're able to link it, you're able to sort of see sort of what is the plan that, and obviously it's still in development, so any feedback from us could be really instrumental to make sure that it really meets our needs as the community. And in that plan, you can see that there's a whole section around research, as well as around outreach, and of course, communication infrastructure. And the whole idea is that we want to make sure that we're really doing a lot of the heavy work around making sure to inform our community all about the changes. For example, there's likely to be a change in the race and ethnicity question that we're still sort of going through. And so we want to make sure that our community understands how to complete those kind of sort of new changes. We want people to be engaged, right? We have a whole issue around the language that the census, the surveys conducted in. So we want to make sure that all of our other our community members who do not speak English as their primary language are able to understand all of the questions, but also how to respond in a way that's clear and counsel fairly and accurately. And so the whole idea is to sort of think about the research, the communication, as well as sort of, are there any specific kinds of things that we need to do in terms of connecting with the Census Bureau and other partners. And so in the plan, it's a short read, about, you know, I would say 6 to 8 minutes at the most. And so if you're able to read it, if there's any sort of issues or concerns you have, I'm happy to sort of share that and take that back to the group. But do know that a lot of our feedback and many others have been incorporated into this plan. I just want to see Janine right quick there. And I know, Janine, you've been part of some of those conversations. So just let me know if you want to add anything around Get Out the Count plan for 2025 to 2030. Just keeping that open.
Thanks, Yoma. I would just say that if you can, there was a convening earlier this year that really looked at and talked to stakeholders about some of the ideas that you may see and hear. But I think it's imperative that people actually, you know, especially folks that were on the ground and working with our communities, need to really have input, just like Yoma said. So I just encourage everybody to take a look at the document, and anything that you can think of, anything that doesn't look right, anything that you think should be added, to just make sure you get the feedback, because the plans for 2030 are already well underway, and we're only going to have so much time to say what we need to say. So yeah.
Thank you for that. And I will flag, I think to that point is, I think I sent earlier, maybe last week, the Census Bureau's priorities around research to 2030. We'll be doing a sort of a deeper dive on that, because I think that's going to be really, really important. For example, we know that they're already trying to scale back the census offices, which was already a problem in 2020. And so we have to really be nimble, but also really for thinking about how do we address some of the structural issues that may actually impact our communities, whether they be those who live in rural communities, our SOGI community, our Black males, those in carceral institutions. And so we'll have to really begin to think deeply about the research agenda of the Census Bureau, but also where are the gaps in communication and outreach. So that's kind of my high level update. I'm gonna give just a little space in case people had questions about that, or about anything that Jerica shared around the national voter registration, or anything around our conversations with the Commerce Department and the U.S. Census Bureau around Black representation. So just giving some space for that. I know that was a lot. I threw a lot out there in the update. But we'll obviously, all of this will follow up with the video, of course, as well as all the links and all the letters, then also be posted on the website. So fear not, we will make sure that you have all this information at your fingertips.
Well, thank you so much, Ioma, for that very thorough update. And I encourage all of you who have tuned in to feel free, if there are questions that you have related to Ioma's updates that come to mind later, or questions that you have for our invited guests and upcoming speakers, please do drop them in the chat, and we will do our best to lift them up and make sure they are addressed. Now I would love to turn the floor over to Katie Campbell Simmons to provide an update on the Get Out the Count 2025 through 2030 plan. And I just want to take a moment just to give you a little bit of background on Katie. Katie is currently working with the Census Equity Initiative as a consultant. She's a Massachusetts native and graduate of Hobart and William Smith Colleges with a Bachelor's of Arts in Religious Studies, and Northeastern University with a Master's in Nonprofit Management. The last 23 years in Boston have brought Katie the Walk for Hunger, One Family Incorporated, and Episcopal City Mission. She is engaged in policy review and advocacy, organizing, grant allocation, and management of philanthropic collaboration. Katie's work has focused on social justice issues, including child hunger, affordable housing, and ending homelessness, immigrant rights, and criminal justice reform. She is also committed to ensuring that all residents of Massachusetts are counted in the decennial census and represented during the redistricting process. And with that, Katie, the floor is yours.
So clearly I'm not Katie. And this is breaking news because Jerica didn't get this, but Katie's had a medical emergency with her family pet. And so she literally cannot join us. So I didn't want to cut you off, Jerica, in the middle of your sentences. So we will actually proceed to the SOGI panel. So we actually get to start a little earlier because we do have that, and also the Washington Bureau update. So sorry. So Katie is sorry, she cannot be here.
No worries. And so with that, Ioma, the floor is yours, because I know you are going to be moderating this fabulous SOGI panel. So let's proceed with that. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. I know, thank you for your patience. This is part of when you deal with really important people like Mark and Melanie and so many people, things obviously shifts literally as you're getting on the stage. So thank you all for your patience. So I'm happy to really introduce, what I hope will really be one of many conversations around issues of LGBTQI+ communities, and really its intersection with the Black community. And just to give you just a little bit of background, I just want to make sure that you know why we thought it was important to have this particular panel. So on June 15th last year, President Biden signed the Executive Order 14075 on advancing equity for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex individuals. And this executive order sought to address systemic discrimination and barriers to full participation in our nation's economic and civil life that LGBTQ+ individuals and families still face, recognizing that the disparities and barriers can be the greatest for transgender people and LGBTQI+ people of color. And so, of course, the executive order focuses on many, many things. And one of the things that it does focus on is really promoting inclusive and responsible federal data collection practices to measure and address the disparities that LGBTQI plus individuals, households face while safeguarding privacy, security, and civil rights. And we know the Census Bureau has started to field sort of SOGI questions, as was done the Household Pulse survey in June of 2021 at the height of the pandemic. And really, this survey found that lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender people were more likely than non-LGBT people to experience economic and mental health hardships during COVID-19 pandemic, including experiencing food insecurity, loss of employment, and more likely to experience anxiety and depression. And of course, we've seen a lot in dozens and dozens of legislations attacking the civil rights of LGBTQI plus individuals and communities, and which has placed them in more vulnerable and precarious social, economic, and psychological positions. We know that gathering data for this community, especially when we look through the intersection of race and ethnicity and SOGI, will be critical to ensure all members of the Black community are fairly and accurately counted. And so really it is my pleasure to welcome our guest speakers today on this issue. And I should also just note, I'm going to introduce 3 of them, but 2 of them are here, and one of them will join us momentarily after they do sort of another meeting, because there was breaking news on SOGI FRN. So it's my pleasure to welcome the 3 panelists. The first will be Victoria Kirby York, who is the Director of Public Policy and Programs for the National Black Justice Coalition, NBJC. In this capacity, she is responsible for leading the organization's advocacy and action strategies to maintain NBJC's position as a recognized public policy leader, especially concerning Black, trans, queer, and non-binary, non-conforming people, families, and communities, as well as other multiple marginalized communities. Victoria has been organizing a variety of capacities for over 20 years regarding a number of progressive issues and candidates at the federal, state, and local levels. She served as the Florida Director for Organizing for Action, the nonprofit formed from the president's electoral campaign to support President Barack Obama's legislative agenda. She has also worked in senior level roles in gubernatorial and presidential campaigns in Florida, for U.S. Congresswoman Kathy Castor, in youth education nonprofits, and in the private sector. Welcome, Victoria. Our second panelist will be Naomi Goldberg, who is the Deputy Director and LGBTQ Program Director at Movement Advancement Project, also called MAP, where she leads policy and movement research at MAP. Naomi joined MAP in 2010 after completing a public policy fellowship at the Williams Institute, UCLA School of Law. Naomi received a Master of Public Policy from the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. Naomi has work has focused on LGBT families, LGBT older adults, and economic security for LGBT people. Her work has been published in the Journal of Health Psychology, Archives of Sexual Behavior, Journal of Family Theory and Review, Policy Matters, Michigan Journal of Public Affairs, and Tax Notes. And then finally, Caroline Medina, who will join us shortly, is the Director of Policy at Whitman Walker Institute, an organization striving to ensure all persons can live healthily and love openly and to feel true equality and inclusion in all aspects of their lives through care, advocacy, research, and education. Caroline was at the Center for American Progress as Director of LGBTQI plus Research and Communications Director. Caroline has been extensively active on issues from international human rights law, legislation, and public policies tied to LGBTI inclusion in the area of civil rights, health education, and criminal justice in OECD countries. Caroline worked as a legislative director and chief of staff to State Representative Kay Khan, House Chair of the Massachusetts Joint Committee on Children, Families, and Persons with Disabilities. So with that, welcome to Victoria, Naomi, as well as Caroline when she is able to join us. And really,
I'm here, by the way. Hi, Yuma.
Oh, there you are. Perfect. Okay, perfect timing. Well, welcome. So we're going to just jump into our conversations. And again, thank you to our really esteemed panel for joining us on this really important topic. So I'll first start with Victoria, if I may. So Victoria, NBJC's mission is to end racism, homophobia, and LGBTQ and SGL bias and stigma. Can you share more about NBJC's role in addressing systemic racism and homophobia experienced by Black, trans, and LGBTQI individuals and communities? And can you also share the role they have regarding data inclusion and its importance specifically for Black communities?
Yes. Thank you so much for inviting us to be a part of this conversation. Data is something that, as you all know, is incredibly important. NBJC, when we sum up our mission quickly, we say we're unapologetically Black and unapologetically queer. And to borrow from Issa Rae, we rooting for everybody Black. And if others on this call are also rooting for everybody Black, that means there can be no exclusions in our Blackness, right? The Black community is not a monolith, right? We say that every election. We're like, y'all, posters, come on, y'all. We're not a monolith. We're not all the same. There are similarities and there are differences. And that comes down to, that includes sexual and gender minorities, but it also includes sex-based characteristics, whether male, female, intersex. That includes immigration, where we live. Those of us from the South have certain ways that we show up in the world from our brothers and sisters and sibs from the Midwest, right? And other parts of the country. Class, education are all other examples, right? So when we talk about data inclusion, what we mean is making sure not a single Black person is left behind when we craft public policy that's designed to support all of us. And so when we look at the Black LGBTQ plus and same gender loving community specifically, there are a few areas that we call both data crises, but also areas of urgent need for solutions when it comes to our community. And one thing I want to say, just to make sure I don't forget it, because this is the other piece that's critical. Data, good data, inclusive data, backs up the urgency of the stories and realities that many of us have known about for a very long time, right? So it's one thing to say, you know, my cousin Chanel had XYZ happen. She's a same gender loving woman. She experienced discrimination when she went to adopt or foster a child. Well, the next question is, how many people does this issue impact and where? Which congressional, state, city level districts are impacted by this issue? And unfortunately, right now, we don't have that data, not exhaustively in the way that we can if we have SOGI incorporated into the census and other federal government surveys. A good example is around the epidemic of violence facing Black transgender women in this country. Black trans women represent 3/4 of the transgender women who are murdered each year at a disproportionate rate compared to their population. They represent 0.5% of the Black community, yet have numbers that should never be the reality for the size of their population. And too often these cases go unsolved. And one of the reasons law enforcement agencies are able to get away with it is because we don't have good data that allows us to say, in Miami-Dade County in Florida, this number of women have been murdered and their deaths have gone unsolved and sometimes not even investigated. Just last year in Illinois, there were in a 12-month period, 8 Black transgender women who were murdered with completely no responses from Chicago Police Department in terms of being able to solve it. That has started to change now with some pushback that we're able to help be a part of. But too often, there isn't that level of accountability. Thankfully, in 2010, the census started to be able to call data that at least gave us some information about same-sex couples who are living together, right? So we were able to see that, much like we figured, the majority of Black LGBTQ plus and same gender loving people live amongst other Black people, right? We don't move to neighborhoods when we come out like our white siblings. We still live with, you know, in the community where our grandparents and mothers and siblings live and have lived for generations in the Black Belt. Many of our folks have lived there since we were brought here during enslaved times and are not planning on going anywhere. Yet, we don't have data for any same gender loving people who are unmarried, are not living together, are trans or gender nonconforming, right? Because those questions aren't currently asked on the census, which means we don't have as accurate data as we could going down to the hyperlocal level when it comes to what we know from other data sources, our disproportionate disparity when it comes to household income, when it comes to housing programs, when it comes to the over 30% of homeless youth that identify as LGBTQ, and the disproportionate amount of them being our kids, largely because they've been kicked out of their homes once they've invited their family in or they've been forced out. You hear the refrain, "You ain't gonna be gay up in my house," right? So they end up on the streets. And so having good data allows agencies to be able to say, we have a real big homelessness issue in the Atlanta metropolitan area. We need to focus resources that are culturally competent for the Black LGBTQ community. And our Blackness is important because there are cultural realities that's different for us than it is for other parts of our community. And so being able to have data disaggregated that allows us to see not just what's impacting LGBTQ people or just impacting Black people, but that intersection allows us to be able to better point resources to agencies and also nonprofit organizations that are doing the real work on the ground to address these issues and to provide support. We know that when it comes to mental health and suicide, we have some good, decent, we could have better, but the data that we do have around mental health, suicide, and over policing of our youth in schools, we see a disproportionate impact when it comes to Black LGBTQ youth. You can find more information about that. I'll drop it in the chat from our Ring the Alarm report that we did with the Congressional Black Caucus. And finally, because I know the others have things to say, there's so many nuances that's really specific to Black folks. I could talk about this and have talked about this for hours. But the other example that I'll give is that because of the Williams Institute, we know that even though same gender loving women represent less than 5% of the population, we represent over 40% of the people in women's prisons. Now, NBJC suspects, because we talk to our people, that if we actually had racialized data for that data point, that the vast majority of those same gender loving women that are overrepresented are probably also Black, right? And in part because when police see Black, butch, stud, aggressive, whatever, however your community defines masculine of center women, they're perceived to be Black men, right? So they are then treated and policed in the same way that we see Black men and boys policed. And so it has a lot of policy implications that we can't begin to scratch the surface of legislatively if we don't have data to take back to members of Congress to say, this is a big issue in your district and it matters. And you need to sponsor, endorse, champion this legislation so that we can have this situation addressed. And when we talk about racial profiling, that we also talk about gender profiling, because Black masculinity is what we're seeing being targeted, whether that takes place in the male, female, or intersex form. So I'll stop for now.
No,
thank you.
No, Victoria, thank you. And please be sure to drop some of those links in the chat and we'll make sure to share it. I think you're just giving us just a sneak peek of why we need this data. And it was a good segue also to ask Caroline to join us in this conversation. Obviously, we'll also bring in Naomi, but Caroline, to join us in this conversation, to share with us, there has been a little bit of, if I can use the term breaking news nowadays, breaking news around SOGI and maybe the census and maybe an FRN, I don't know. So can you share with us, what is the current work being done by the Census Bureau on SOGI, and are there any breaking updates that you want to share with the roundtable? So please, I invite you to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. In terms of the Bureau, there's a lot of exciting things going on right now. So as VKY mentioned, the Bureau has collected data on same-sex couples since at least 2010, which is great and super important, but that only actually captures about 1 in 6 LGBTQI folks. So there's a huge part of our community that we're not seeing. Recently, there are important developments that have been happening. So last year, the Department of Justice submitted a letter to the Census Bureau formally requesting adding sexual orientation and gender identity measures to the ACS. That letter went through legal review by the Department of Commerce, and they found that it could be approved because it provided very specific legal and programmatic justifications for collecting those data. So next, a couple of things are going to happen. The Bureau is going to start conducting cognitive interviews for adding those questions to the ACS. And then after that, they're going to field a test that should be at the end of the upcoming summer into early next fall. And they're planning to publish a report about how those measures perform in 2025. That's very exciting, but the most exciting thing that I wanted to flag is that today, actually, the Census Bureau published its Federal Register notice requesting that the Office of Management and Budget approve its plan to conduct a test of sexual orientation and gender identity measures on the ACS. The test is referred to as the 2024 ACS Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Test. The Federal Register notice does note the sort of programmatic and legal justifications that agencies have for those data, but then it really focuses on its proposal to test question wording, response categories, and placement of SOGI questions on the ACS. This is super exciting. It is a 60-day comment period. The comments are due November 20th. The proposals that they have included in terms of the question design, they both reflect evidence-based best practices about how to ask these questions, but they're also pushing the envelope a little bit and testing sort of areas of priority research that LGBTQI advocates and that other academies like the national academies have asked for them to test out. So they are trying to improve these measures through this test. So that's very exciting to see. And I'm also happy to, I'm not sure if it's me or Naomi, but I'm also happy to walk through some of the materials that we're working in coalition to provide in order to help folks both respond to the Federal Register notice, as well as sort of raise general awareness about this opportunity and about the importance of these data.
Thank you, Caroline, and we will want to get to some of that. I do want to bring Naomi in because I want her, again, for some people, the discussion about SOGI and sort of related topics may be uncomfortable. So I would love to hear from Naomi to just share with us more about obviously MAP and what they've been doing to help shape discussions, particularly with conflicted or undecided Americans, and really help them better understand key issues of importance to LGBTQ people, and really what are some of the tools and strategies we can use in the work to talk about LGBTQI plus issues and the census and those kind of things. So yes, please, Naomi.
Yeah, thank you so much, Yoma, and thank you all for having me. As Caroline mentioned, this is a really exciting time, and we're hoping that everyone will get involved. But as Yoma said, we know that people are on different journeys when it comes to thinking about LGBTQ people who may be in their family or in their communities, and how do we sort of model acceptance and help people feel a part of the work. And something that we've been doing at MAP, the Movement Advancement Project, since 2006, is really trying to understand who people are and what they think and feel about LGBTQ people, and then deeply understanding that and then developing messages and conversations to help move them along in a journey. And really, we believe that everyone is on a journey when it comes to LGBTQ issues and acceptance. And so recognizing where people are, validating their feelings, but then also saying, have you thought about this? Or, LGBTQ people want the same things that you do. And much of our work, around 2006 to 2012 focused on marriage equality. And we did deep focus groups with Americans to help understand how to think about marriage equality and the work that we were doing both through the courts and in legislatures and at the ballot box. And, just to be honest, like much of that work centered on, how do conversations of framing marriage as a civil right, for example, resonate or not with Black Americans? And really what we learned was that we have to sort of really meet people again where they are and think about how do people think about different issues. So in the example of trans kids playing sports, for example, we have conversations with people about why do you want your kids to play sports? What do kids gain from playing sports in schools? People say things like community, physical activity, teamwork, perseverance, all of those great things. And then we can say, well, trans kids want those same things. That's why trans kids want to play sports. And so when we sort of are able to have shared values by deeply listening and then helping people see the ways in which LGBTQ people fit into those shared values, it can help create the opening to say, did you know, for example, that policymakers are trying to make it impossible for the trans middle school kid to play on her volleyball team with her friends or to go to the bathroom, safely at school. So that's just a little bit about sort of how MAP thinks and works. And we have done work both on LGBTQ issues. We've done work recently around voting, including in California with the Haas Jr. Fund around Black voters, particularly. We've also done work around immigration. And so definitely if you are looking for messaging guides or help starting conversations, we have a lot of that work, some of which is on our website, which I will drop, but a lot of it, from I can imagine reasons you understand, are behind the scenes. And so it's more like if you're looking to have conversations with policymakers or with communities about different issue areas, feel free to reach out to us.
Did we lose Naomi?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so we'll wait for her to come back. But obviously we have 12 minutes, but we want to sort of ask both VKY, Victoria, as well as Caroline why they're here, to just what are the one or two or three things that the Census Black Roundtable, the administration, and other influential groups that's part of this broad network can do to address the inclusion of SOGI data at the local, state, and national levels. I'd love to hear from both Victoria and Caroline. Obviously, when maybe we can hop back on, we'll want to hear from her as well.
I'd say education is incredibly important in being able to really help to shift the way elected officials and also people in our communities think about data collection, and also the LGBTQ plus community. Unfortunately, in the media, for a while, when you saw gay or trans representation, it was almost always a white man, right? A white gay man. And so a lot of people, when they think about gay people, they think of, insert X, white gay man from an early 2000s or 2010 TV show, right? Or maybe they think of Ellen DeGeneres, right? And even though when you look at the data we do have, census data would give us even more accurate data, people of color are overrepresented in the LGBTQ community based off of our numbers, but underrepresented in the media and the images that people see. So often when we talk about the need for good Black data, people don't even think about Black, queer, trans, and non-binary people, because we just continue to think about like white gay people, right? But particularly white gay men. And so being able to talk to people and educate them about the realities of this particular part of our community is important. The same as it's important for us to talk about the unique needs that Black men have, or that Black women have, or Black immigrants might face, or Black disabled people, or Black seniors have, right? In order to have the fullness of our community represented, it's important that every single person really understands and takes pride in the fact that Black people aren't all the same. And in order to have data that really meets the needs, that people have to play a role, play a part. And in order to do that, you have to remove the stigma and the stereotypes, right? Which requires us to have these conversations, and it requires us to highlight what the disparities are, and also where we just don't have enough data. And those conversations have to happen at the water cooler, with our families, in our communities, and especially with lawmakers and other decision makers, mayors, anybody who has access to being able to ensure that sexual orientation, gender identity expression are included on surveys, the census, of course, which is what we're pushing for, but also in other surveys that are sent out through government and also other means.
Thank you. And I think you sort of flagged, and I hope if people have questions for you and for Caroline and Naomi, that they put it in the chat, but we can also provide information. And Caroline, is there something you want to add regarding what is something that the Roundtable could do and other partners to sort of move data inclusion forward for SOGI and LGBTQI community? Is there more that you would advise for us to do? If you can share your thoughts.
Sure. I think VKOI captured a lot. I will go in a slightly different direction, which is just that this is the Federal Register notice that I dropped in the chat and that I mentioned is a truly unique opportunity. The ACS collects so much data that it would really provide data that allows us to engage in more intersectional analysis, to know specifically about LGBTQI communities of color, LGBTQI folks with disabilities. So it's so hugely important. I think it would be wonderful. We are going to be working in coalition to circulate a sign-on letter that is in support of the Census Bureau moving forward with this research and testing. We would 100% love the support of organizations on this call to encourage the Bureau to proceed with testing. So there will be a sign-on letter distributed through a bunch of different networks. We'll make sure that it's also here. If folks have any questions, we are always available to hop on a call to talk more. We're basically just a bunch of data nerds that want to talk about this all the time. In addition to that, there will be a template for organizations to fill in the blank of how they would use the data if for some reason the sign-on letter is not touching on some of the details of your organization, for example. And then we're developing a sort of slate of different materials about the ACS, about SOGI data inclusion on the ACS, and that's to just kind of like raise awareness about how this impacts communities, LGBTQI communities, but also just for the importance of being able to disaggregate data to get a closer look at populations that unfortunately are not always counted in the current existing questions that we have. So I would love to continue to stay in touch about how to support responding to the FRN, and I'm looking forward to sharing those materials as well.
Thank you. And with 1 minute left for our panel, and I see that Naomi's back, hopefully she can hear us. I want to see if she wanted to add anything else to the conversation, and also to see if anybody had any questions or comments to really just what you've heard so far around this particular topic. So I'm just going to give a little bit of space for Naomi to just, if you want to close up any of your thoughts, but also if there's any questions, feel free to put in the chat. And if we have time, we'll go through it. If not, we'll make sure to get responses to those questions.
Yeah, sorry all for dropping off. I'm not sure exactly where I left off, but I put my information in the chat, and feel free to reach out with anything around messaging, work, LGBTQ related, voting, or data inclusion. Happy to talk.
All right. Well, thank you so much. If there's no questions right now, because it was a lot, obviously, but we'll make sure to follow up with all the links and obviously the FRN. And obviously, Caroline and team will share with us their sign-on letter and any of the resources. And we'll definitely be sure to keep all of our Roundtable members and affiliates posted on that. So with that, I will go ahead and actually hand it over to Angela Ohm, the Vice President, Appropriations and Investment for the National Urban League and the Washington Bureau, to share any updates from the Washington Bureau. Angela, can I pass it over to you?
Yes.
Sorry, I think I took Jericho your part.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that introduction, and thank you all for letting me be on here. I am filling in for Yvette Numako. She's our Vice President for Policy and the Acting Executive Director of our office right now. So as you all probably know, we are sort of heading into crunch time to get the federal government funded. The funding runs out September 30th, and right now things are a bit of a mess on the Hill, and we go into this with the House bill, the Commerce Justice Science bill that funds the House. It's been, and the Census Bureau in it has been cut by 130 million in that version of the bill, and the Senate version of the bill has been has the Census Bureau being increased by $16 million. So there's obviously a vast difference on that account and many others across the federal government between the House and the Senate. And the House has only gotten their bill out of subcommittee. The Senate has at least gotten theirs through full committee. And right now there's talk of a looming government shutdown that could, some people are saying last 10 days. Obviously it could not happen at all. It could last fewer days. It could last a lot longer. I actually came from the House Appropriations Committee, so I've spent a number of years, and deals often fall apart before they come together, but this year is looking particularly bad. Speaker McCarthy is a weakened speaker because it's only going to take one vote for conservatives to sort of act on their anger with anything he does and take him out as speaker. And then who knows who they would possibly get to lead them. That's sort of the one thing that could possibly give him some job security in this situation. But basically, right now, that the House this morning was supposed to have a rule on a version of the continuing resolution that they were going to put forward, but that rule was pulled because they didn't have the votes for it. So right now they are going to have the defense rule on the floor and consideration of the defense bill, general debate, and then amendments later on tonight, while they try and work out what they want to do on the continuing resolution. And basically, normally a sort of a standard continuing resolution would continue for current government funding levels with just a few changes here and there to sort of make up for certain adjustments that agencies might need in particular circumstances. And if it's expected to be a shorter CR, usually fewer of those are needed. For longer ones, you need more. And right now, we haven't seen the Senate's version of a CR. They may wind up trying to use some legislative vehicle to move something on their end too. We don't know just yet. And we, there's a big dispute with the conservatives. They want to go ahead and start cutting funding levels right now down closer to the level that they have in their bills. The House has been passing appropriations bills that were even lower than the agreed upon levels in the debt ceiling legislation, whereas the Senate has stuck to the agreement on the debt ceiling legislation. So that gap is playing out now, even in something where it should just be, hey, let's just fund things as they are now until we can get to a point where we can negotiate a bill. So things are highly uncertain right now, both in terms of what the final number for the census and other agencies could end up being, and very uncertain in terms of will there be a shutdown. So sorry, I don't have better news than that or any more clarity, but that's where we are for right now.
Well, thank you so much for that update, Angela. There is obviously a lot going on in Washington, and thank you to you and your colleagues who are really steering the ship in Washington for the National Urban League during this time. I also want to acknowledge and thank our co-conveners, President Morial and President Campbell, for their leadership in this work. Many thanks to you, Ioma, and really pulling this all together and sharing these great updates. And thanks to all of our speakers. I think it was a really engaging conversation, and I know there are many of you that may have follow-up questions. Please feel free to share those with Ioma directly, and she'll get back to you. And we've also recorded this session, so we will share that out and also posted on the National Urban League's website under the census section, better known as Make Black Count. So we thank you all again for joining us for today's quarterly meeting. We look forward to meeting with you later in the year on other topics, but thanks again for your time and attention. And for those of you who will be in Washington enjoying CBC week, we look forward to seeing you there as well. And please, as we close out National Voter Registration Day, encourage those that you may know of to check their registration status or to actually register if they have not done so. They can do so at reclaimyourvote.org. That's the National Urban League's portal. So please keep that in mind as a resource for you in the future. Thanks again to everyone who joined us. We look forward to seeing you next time, and have a great week. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.